I'm Elizabeth Doran, President and CEO of North Carolina Theater, which has been proudly producing professional theater and education programming in Raleigh for over 37 years. On behalf of all of us at North Carolina Theater, welcome to All In Community Conversations, presented by PNC. All In Community Conversations is a digital series of community-led dialogues that examine the themes of our shows that tie to the hopes, ambitions, and challenges of our shared North Carolina community. This program connects with All In, North Carolina Theater's community engagement vision established in 2017. Through this vision, we hope to be a source of equitable access to artistic and educational programs and opportunities for all. Today's episode of All In celebrates and takes a deep dive into our production of Dolly Parton's Broadway hit musical, 9 to 5. We have gathered a fantastic panel of local leaders who are thoughtfully engaging the themes at the heart of this wickedly funny show. To share more with us about this classic story and how North Carolina Theater is approaching the show, let's talk with some of the artists who are making it all happen.
Hi, I'm Eric Woodall. I'm the producing artistic director of North Carolina Theater, and I'm also the director of this production, 9 to 5. I have with me two of the other creative team members.
Hi, I'm Robin Levine, choreographer.
Hi, I'm Monica Kapoor, Associate Choreographer.
We wanted to talk a little bit about what this show is and what our approach is with this show, why we are doing it today. 9 to 5 is based on the hit film that starred Lily Tomlin, Jane Fonda, and Dolly Parton. It became a Broadway musical many years after that, and Dolly Parton wrote the music herself. So it's this great story revolving around three women who are making their way through the workplace in the late 70s, early 80s. And they're dealing with a lot of the injustice of how women are treated versus how men are treated. I think we can relate to a lot of those topics today, which is one of the reasons that we picked the show. Because even though some circumstances are different in 2021 as they were in 1979, a lot of things have not changed and need to change. So in this comedic form of musical theater comedy, we are able to highlight just where we are today.
With the dance department, the show is full of high-energy production numbers. It's got a great athletic style, and the approach behind it was really story-driven and finding that athleticism and the strength, just as these women are finding it, so we can help use the movement to help forward the journey of their empowerment. So it's high energy and fun.
And it's really exciting to see the journey and just to reflect on the evolution of where we've been and where we are now. Seeing the strength of these women, it just brings you joy and makes you feel good.
One of the largest struggles or obstacles I think that we faced in producing this show today is how do we depict the boss, who is quite a character that is full of very misogynistic values and actions. And we don't shy away from depicting that character the way he was. But in doing so, we are highlighting how wrong it is and how we don't stand for a lot of the things that we used to stand for. And so it's a little jarring to begin with when we start the show and we're seeing some of the early scenes. But then when we see how the women take charge and turn everything around, it is very satisfying.
Empowerment, equity, and taking action, all while hanging tight to that great Dolly spirit that America has loved for decades. 9 to 5 is sure to be wonderfully fun with some great wisdom to boot, Dolly style. Leading our All In community conversation today is Dr. Murray Rieman.
My name is Murray Rieman, and I'm Executive Director of WomenNC, a nonprofit dedicated to women's empowerment. We work with young scholars from universities around the state to examine gender disparities, gender discrimination. We pair them up with social science researchers from RTI's Global Gender Center, and they explore a topic, come up with short-term, low-cost policy solutions to improve the status quo, and then advocate to implement those policies to make the lives of women and children better. We also have two related programs. We have a Cities for CEDAW program, which brings the principles of the International Human Rights Treaty called CEDAW down to local municipalities. And our third program is very similar to this, a community education program where we bring experts together to discuss and explore topics of concern to those interested in gender justice. And we both explore the topics and then empower our audience to advocate themselves to improve the lives of women and girls in the particular areas we discuss. You can learn more about what we do at womennc.org. But enough about me. Let me have each of the panelists introduce themselves. But we thought we might do something a little bit interesting here. Because the North Carolina Theater is sponsoring this community conversation, I thought before they introduce themselves, or maybe after, each one of our panelists could discuss or actually tell us what their favorite musical or play is, and just a sentence or two about why. So let the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll come back together as a group and explore some of the topics and themes raised in 9 to 5. First, let's go to Dr. Valerie Ann Johnson. Dr. Johnson?
Yes, hello everyone. It's great to be here and I appreciate the invitation. Thank you, North Carolina Theater, for this opportunity to talk a little bit about a musical that I'm looking forward to seeing, but based on a movie that I thoroughly enjoyed for many different kinds of reasons. My name is, again, Dr. Valerie Ann Johnson, pronoun she, her, and I am Dean of Arts, Sciences, and Humanities at Shaw University, as well as Professor of Sociology and Anthropology. When you asked about my favorite musical, that's kind of hard. I have two that are tied, and they represent two different times in my life. The first one is Les Miserables. And I can't, there are so many aspects of that particular musical that I enjoyed. Part of it was I saw it when I was in my 20s. I was able to see it on the London stage, and it just represented to me glorious music, difficult topic, heartbreak, and triumph. And so it just had everything there. It just filled you up. And the other one is Rent. And Rent just hit hard when I was doing my field research in New York City. Rent represents that time for me and the issues that it brings forth. Again, poignant, heartbreaking, there's a little bit of triumph. So all the things that you like to see in a musical, plus good music that I can remember in my head.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson. Let me go next to Kat Reach. Kat, would you tell us about your favorite play or musical, and then a little bit about who you are and what you do and what your organization does?
Sure. Thanks, Maria. Hello, everyone. My name is Kat Reach. I'm the Director of Construction Operations at a small nonprofit called Hope Renovations in Carborough, North Carolina. My first thought was Rent as well, Dr. Johnson. But I also thought back to the first play that I kind of became aware of when I was really young. It's called The Search for Signs of Intelligent Life in the Universe, and it was a one-woman play with Lily Tomlin, who kind of has become one of my just heroes in life, and just a super amazing performer. And again, she plays all of these different roles and over the course of this one play, and lots of feminist themes within that play, which is really great. And so very quickly about Hope Renovations, we are a 501c3. We kicked off about a year ago, and we work to train women and underrepresented groups to come into the skilled construction trades. So we have a 10-week pre-apprenticeship training program that we do. We've put about 5 cohorts through, graduated 5 cohorts, and we also have a construction program, which is what I help to run and support, where we do accessibility and universal design projects for aging adults and folks with disabilities.
Great. Thanks, Kat. And now let me turn to Nicole. Nicole Oxendine, would you tell us about your favorite play or musical, and then about you and the work that you do?
So I'm happy to be here as well. My name is Nicole Oxendine, and I'm the owner of Empower Dance Studio located here in Durham, and the Empower Dance Foundation, which is our nonprofit affiliate. This is a great question for me. I'm a dancer and a choreographer. I have taught dance at Hillside High School for many years with the amazing musical theater program they have there, and I've done a lot of choreography for a lot of musicals. My favorite is The Wiz, and that's because it was the first production I did in 2nd grade, and I was the good witch. So from there, I fell in love with the arts, and I love the dancing and the music that's featured in The Wiz, and it's just still connect with me today. And it's a production that we put on at the dance studio as our annual fall showing. So that's what's most important to me. What Empower Dance Studio represents is just, it's all in the name, and it's about empowering young women, young boys, young girls, young people, just to be themselves, understanding the benefits of dance and movement. My master's degree is in psychology, dance therapy, which is the blending of the psychology and the dance. So my approach to movement is really about how can you use movement to uplift and to tell wonderful stories, and not as a way to shame or cut down. So we particularly specialize in creating safe space and building a community for dance.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Nicole. And let me now turn to Bridget Pittman-Blackwell. Bridget, tell us about what play or musical you find most appealing, what you're doing, and how you fit in to this panel today.
Absolutely. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. As mentioned, my name is Bridget Pittman-Blackwell. I am a former scholar and current board member of WomenNC, a state nonprofit that focuses on female empowerment and advancing gender equity in North Carolina. And Maria, she did a fabulous job giving information about WomenNC, so I won't repeat too much of that. But to move on to that next question of my favorite musical that I have seen, it would have to be my very first one that I saw, a classic, Phantom of the Opera. I remember first seeing it in high school. Our professor, she showed it to us in a movie, and we were all just like, oh my goodness, like this was like the best thing ever in high school. And then we got the chance to actually go see it in the actual musical production, and it was absolutely amazing. And I still remember it like it was yesterday, just being in shock and awe of being in that theater environment with the lights, seeing the music, hearing everything. It was an experience that I certainly still remember and could not forget. So that definitely has to be my favorite.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Bridget. And one of the things I just want to mention that both Kat and Bridget talked about, and maybe Nicole too, although I'm not sure, is the idea of theater and film and the interplay between the two of them. And of course, 9 to 5 was initially a movie, and it's been turned into a play, a musical. And I think that's, Kat mentioned Lily Tomlin as one of her favorite musicals. As some of you might remember, Lily Tomlin starred in the movie 9 to 5. Anyway, I just think it's sort of an interesting note about the difference and the similarities between movie versions of productions and film versions. Something just to think about as we move along. Anyway, so thanks so much, you all, for sharing the work that you do, and also about your favorite musical. But now I'd like to move on to some of the questions that really will inform the rest of our discussion. And I'd like to open up these questions in general to the panel. So feel free, people, to start us off. Feel free to respond to each other. It would be fabulous to have a conversation going, but let's just see where this takes us. So let me start with the first question that I have about 9 to 5. And it really is, as some of you may know if you've seen it before, and for those of you who haven't, here's a little heads up. The musical 9 to 5 was inspired by a true story of the women's labor movement of female office workers who demanded better pay, better working conditions, and better professional opportunities back in the 1970s. The 9 to 5 movement, that movement where women demanded those things, has often been compared to the more recent Me Too movement. And I'm curious, do you find that comparison apt? Do you think they're similar? And if you do, how so? And if not, if you're kind of scratching your head, how are those two movements different? And then a related question around all of this is, why is female empowerment and gender equity just as important today as it was back then? So let me be quiet now and see if anybody wants to start us off with these questions about comparing the 70s movement to the more recent movement, similar and different, and all of that.
Well, I can say I think the comparison to the Me Too movement and 9 to 5, what I would see is that sense of power, the power dynamic and the structure. So people coming out about, Me Too was all about that suppression of that started, has been going on for such a long time, even back to 9 to 5, where you see this, with being a real life example and seeing this on TV, in the film. But now comparing it to people having those same experiences still to this day and not even having that, space to speak up about it. That would be the main thing I would think about in terms of the comparison.
So it's a bit apt then, in your view.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Johnson.
Yes, I think that I look at them as interconnected and as a part of a continuum of the push to be ever more inclusive in our workplaces. And so when I think of the Me Too movement, I think of it as raising issues that also are a part of workplace discrimination that manifests itself in really, to me, horrific ways. The things that can press you down, and oppress you in your workplace was relevant back in the days, they say, under the 9 to 5 movement, where it wasn't just about trying to get equal pay for equal work. It was also about having a certain amount of dignity and respect in the workplace and not being expected to only be in certain roles and only be a certain way. And for me as a Black woman, I can't help but raise the issue of intersectionality, that you can't de-link race, gender, the way you show up in your sexual identity, and all the other identities that you hold. And so that's why I say it's a continuum for me.
Would anyone like to respond to Dr. Johnson's point?
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment about intersectionality, Dr. Johnson. And I too would just add that, the same belief systems and thoughts that created the problematic laws that were addressed and workplace conditions that were addressed initially in the 1970s still exist today. And they might look very, very nuanced and maybe better hidden. And laws may have changed since then, but the same beliefs and approaches that we see in workplaces are very much still prevalent, workplaces and outside of workplaces. So, and that takes time. So, I was in a meeting recently about gender equity, and somebody asked, what's the timeline for this? And, you can't give a timeline, right? Because this is humans, this is human work, and that takes time, so.
Do you all feel like we're still fighting the same battles? I heard both Dr. Johnson and Kat speak about sort of the evolution and how we now talk about in sort of deeper and more complicated ways the issues surrounding intersectionality that don't just involve gender, but also, as Dr. Johnson said, are other identities that we carry. Yet there's a part of me, and I wonder how the rest of you feel, both in your study of history as well as through your experiences. Sometimes I feel like we're fighting the same damn battle we were 40 years ago. And I guess I'd like to just throw that out. Do you think that's a glass half empty way of taking a look at the way things are? Or am I right, at least in some ways?
I would certainly like to respond to that piece. And I love the piece about the first question. Dr. Johnson, you mentioned that dignity and respect. And that is what that 9 to 5 movement and the Me Too movement both had in similarities. And when you look at female empowerment and gender equity from a lens of current studies and prior studies, you still see those same issues that stem from that root of not having that dignity and not having that respect. And so when we look at where we are now and looking at, are we fighting the same battles? Are we still seeing the same issues? We are on some level, but also on a different level, we're fighting them in a different way. We're coming at them from a different corner. We're attacking all of these issues, noting what has been the root cause of the issues, but fighting them in a different way. And to piggyback from the previous question, the Me Too movement, major difference is that social media piece. You are able to get and receive information and use your voice with the click of a button, with the click of sending a tweet, with the click of sharing a post on social media. And I think that is a major way, even though we may still be fighting those similar battles from now, from past, from wherever we're looking at, we're able to attack it from a different perspective. We're able to utilize different platforms. That is certainly one area where we have certainly improved and involved when looking at female empowerment and gender equity from now to prior times.
And just to piggyback on that, I think, Bridget, you're exactly right. That piece of accountability is different now, like being able to speak up and not have the repercussions come back. I think in that time it was like you could, if you're fired, you can go to these platforms and you can push, if you do speak out, you can really rally other people to support and come behind you in that space where before speaking out was, a taboo. It was not the thing to do. You kept quiet and put your head down and, eased on out. So an excellent point with the social media piece.
Yeah, let me just throw in a piece. Not only is there social media, but there are also laws and commissions and places that you can actually go to, chains of command, DEI initiatives at corporations. There's at least some way formalized perhaps today in a way that you didn't have 40 years ago, that at least allows you, not just on social media, but literally within the power structure. Now, whether that works or not, it seems to me that's a different question. But those, the backbones of that perhaps are in place.
And I wanted to speak to that a little bit. So I'm glad you opened up the door to that, Nicole, because what often gets lost in the historical record, or in our recollection of what happened, or the ways in which Black women, brown women showed up to help push things through and help establish laws. So can't help it, but I've got to mention Eileen Clark Hernandez. Now, Eileen Clark Hernandez is an African-American woman who was the first woman to become to be appointed to the what was then called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. This was in 1964. So if you want to talk about kind of laying a legal foundation and a statutory foundation and the other ways in which our government steps in. So here's this woman, Black woman, who was appointed. She stayed there only 18 months because the commission didn't move fast enough for her, because everything, think about 1964, how pressing all the various issues were in getting people to have their civil rights, their full civil rights. So I have to lift up Eileen Clark Hernandez in this space, because she was also for a year president of the National Organization of Women, which brings me to another person that's close to us, and that's Pauli Murray. And there is no way that we can have a conversation about labor, about discrimination of various sorts, without at least, acknowledging all the work she did across decades to promote rights. And we are blessed in Durham to be able to have her home place, one of the places where she lived and while she was in Durham and raised in Durham, as a national landmark. And so I would point you out to the Pauli Murray Center, and I don't have all the full name of it, but these are the women who were engaged in this struggle to lay the foundation so that people now will have legal precedent to go to in order to assert those rights. So that's kind of one of the templates that I use to help understand where we are right now.
And I'll just follow up on Dr. Johnson's comment. There's a documentary about Pauli Murray's life that's going to be released in the next couple of days. And so I'll just throw out for your consideration, the panelists as well as the audience, there's a number of ways to get into these topics. One of them is in conversations like this. Documentaries are another good way, especially about under-known people like Pauli Murray to the general public. And the woman that you mentioned, Dr. Johnson, whose name I actually can't repeat, which is horrible. There are unknown champions. So that's one way to get in, to hold up in an important way. And then we also have a way to engender discussion in a more lighthearted way, right? With a musical like 9 to 5. And so I think one of the things that you have reminded us of is the different ways to get into all of this. And Nicole, you are a dancer and teach dance. It seems to me that that is yet another way that one can approach these themes and begin conversations and deepen understandings. If we have sort of multimedia, and to point out Bridget's point about social media. So there's a number of entry points and points of comparison and contrast that we can use to enter into dialogue about this. Well, is there anyone who'd like to kind of add another comment about then and now and the changes or the metamorphoses that have taken place before we move on to the next question? Okay, well, let me throw out the next question to you for your consideration, panelists, and you too, audience. Here it is. Where have you seen the most progress on gender equality in your life and in your work? And sort of conversely, what's the biggest issue that you believe is still present that we need to work on? So progress on one hand, need to improve on the other. What do you see as the issues we've made the most progress on and issues that still need a lot of work with regard to gender equality?
I'll jump in. I think a lot of this relates to the last question, but I think some of the progress that I'm seeing is that our conversation is sort of shifting away from the symptoms of the issue, and we're really like digging deeper into what the root causes of the symptoms are. So we're talking about capitalism and what the consequences are of that are, intended and unintended. We're talking about power, we're talking about exploitation, things like that. And I think, there are a lot of issues still facing women today, but if we're going to narrow it down to like workplace and labor, and the work that I do, what I see most often is that we have to be, and I think this is true, especially when we were talking about race, is that you have to be twice as good, right? So, when we walk onto a work site, we already have this expectation, and then when we do a quality job, it's a surprise to people, right? Because this isn't women's work. Exactly. Yeah, you're muted, Maria, but I could see what you were saying with your mouth. Yeah.
Because your work is not women's work, right?
Exactly.
And so you not only have to be twice as good, but that people are surprised when a quality project emerges.
Right, which is the same conversation, again, that intersectionality conversation, folks that I've been in community with who folks of color, like it's the same thing when they're in white spaces with the dominant culture. Like it's very, very similar. So I've definitely seen progress. I started working in the field when I was 19, and I never saw a woman on site ever. And I know like it's really exciting to be working for an organization now that's training women to go in. And then on our side, we get to see, running into those women at Lowe's or at like Home Builders Association conferences who are like doing the work and just, kicking butt. And, that it's really great to see like that kind of like we're changing the industry, which is really neat.
That is fabulous. What do others have to say about the progress and then the problems that remain?
I can speak a little bit in terms of the arts. When it comes to, I would say it's the same everywhere, like gatekeepers, who runs companies. A lot of times we talk about ballet. We talk about the abuse that happens in dance. A lot of that's male white men that are in the position of the directors, that are hiring and bringing in people. So what do you see in terms of the lack of diversity when you look at the arts? It's who's the gatekeepers to even getting into the space. What I am seeing now, and I'm following a group on social media of dance activists, Black dance activists, it's a national group, and they're just really bringing up a lot of these things and even challenging when it comes to what's stolen from the arts, like a lot of things that are taken. We're talking about this in TikTok videos and the dances that we see of like, all right, if we stop doing these dances, that people are profiting off of the work that Black creators are putting out. And, it becomes in that space. And, I am proud to be in the space to own the studio that I can, begin to shift that culture and shift the dynamic and to make my connections to get my dancers to these certain spaces, or to push, if they want to get to a place, if they want to go to Germany, if they want to do certain things, like what are the barriers to access? And a lot of times that's who's in positions of power to even let someone into the door to make money as an artist. And especially for people of color, we don't always value the arts in the way that can be a viable career. So I know just by existing and doing this is something that allows value, where you can be a dancer and you can create and you can do this and this can be a career. And that's for, any artist. It's kind of the same thing of how do we place value, understanding that to get to certain places, who are the gatekeepers that open the doors for you financially.
Let me press you a little bit on that, Nicole, if I can. So are you suggesting that you are seeing greater access for those involved in the arts, particularly women and women of color? Or is that something you've seen progress on? I take it we're not there yet.
But we're trendy. Maybe that's the best, nicest way to say it. It's a trend. And I hate to say it in the way that it's a trend because I want to make sure it's continuing. Before, we push about having tights being the same skin color. You see tights for dancers and they're pink. Pink is not about our skin color. Great. Now we have like all these shades of tights. So it's those little things that are, we're moving towards. It's by far not there, but I think as long as we continue to have the dialogue and push for these things and push for there to be shifts in the leadership positions. And those are, when I go back to that social media group, they're pushing for that. And one of my dance mentors in New York, she's pushing for brown people in these different spaces. So my spaces, I'm training brown dancers, but when they get to a certain level, what's the, what can you do? And I think Kat can probably speak to the same thing when it's a field where, okay, yeah, you can go in and you can work at a certain level, but how do you keep elevating to another level where you can be in a position to hire, women in these spaces?
And I'd like to interject a little bit, and going back to what Bridget raised earlier about social media. I think that we can't underestimate that as a mechanism to push things further and to advocate for more equality, because when things happen that are wrong, poof, it pops up on social media. And that is in part how the younger folk are energized to take the things further than we were able to take them. So I think that is really important. So for example, the stereotypes of Black people and brown people and Asian people that I grew up with that populated the workspace. So you would only see Black, brown, Asian, Native American people in very limited roles in the visual media, unless it was something you were producing from your own community. That changes when we get to social media, where the folks say, have you seen this? This is crazy. And it goes around the whole internet. And it is a way of promoting and pushing and helping us to have tights of all colors rather than just those requisite pink tights. So I'd say that would be one way in which gender equality is promoted, but there's still a lot of resistance, And I've even encountered that in terms of thinking about, we look at higher education and we think that we see all these Black women, for example, as administrators, higher administrators. But when you look at, for example, in the professoriate, only 1%, and barely that, of all of the professors, those who have reached full professor status, are Black women, of all the faculty that are teaching. So that means there's this resistance to our presence in higher ed. So don't be fooled by someone like my president, Paulette Dillard, who she's ever present, but she is not. There are not a whole lot of Black women still who are presidents of universities in the way that should be reflected.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Let me move on to a bit of a lighter topic, perhaps. And here's my next question for you panelists. If you've ever seen 9 to 5, its movie version or its theatrical production, you know it's funny. And before it was a musical, it was listed as one of the top 100 funniest movies of all time. Comic fantasy and mischief bring forth some big ideas in the show that North Carolina Theater is going to be putting on. Comic fantasy It's going to have that lighter element with it. Here's what my question to you all is. Have you found that humor can be a tool in making change? Does humor work as a strategy?
Yes, if I could jump in here for this question, I would absolutely agree with that. Humor can kind of be that gateway to topics that to some people are really too difficult to discuss or honestly even think about. It's so easy for us with the amount of information that's coming at us day to day in the news and what we see on television and just trying to keep up with what's going on in our world. It can be very heavy to sit there and listen to everything that's going on day to day. So humor, especially in musicals, is that way to kind of ease people into these topics that can be really, really difficult to digest and make it so it's still relevant, make it so you still get that pertinent information that people need to hear, but maybe too afraid to even approach. And it kind of, I don't want to say waters down and dilutes the information, but it at least opens that door for people to be able to even have that conversation, even if it's just through a joke or a little bit of humor that you may hear.
The rest of you agree with what Bridget has to say?
Yeah, Bridget, I was going to say something similar, so I really appreciate that. And we had one of our staff meetings this morning, and we got to a point where we really had to get it going because we were just joking and had a lot of we start out with an icebreaker, and humor is a big thing that we use at Hope. Maybe not as intentionally, but I always humor is really like the basis for a lot of the relationships and friendships that I have with folks. And I think that that's a lot of what this work is like relational work. And so making that connection, that kind of helps you to see someone's humanity. And I think humor is a great tool for this kind of work. And that's part of why Dolly is such like a well-loved human, is because she uses that so often, and you do see her humanity so much represented in some of the media that she participates in.
Well, let me throw something out at you all. Have you ever been told, we're all women on this panel, have you ever been told, oh, good Lord, you take everything too seriously. Come off it. Stop, stop taking everything. It was a joke. It was just a joke. What do you mean sexual harassment? What do you mean I'm demeaning? Have you ever had that thrown in your face? In other words, almost the opposite of what Bridget has said. I'm just curious because obviously I've had it thrown in my face. And I'm curious what your response is to that, one, if you've had that happen, and two, how you respond to that sort of dismissal of real concerns that you might have, and someone responds, okay, take a joke.
You just threw me back to when I had a summer job in between semesters when I was an undergraduate, and a joke was made about my breasts by the person who was in charge. And it took me off guard for a minute, just for a minute, to say, wow, that was not appropriate, because he was also an older person. And I said, I was in school with your daughter. Why are you making comments about my body? It's what's going on in my head. And it's inappropriate because I'm learning about what it is to be in a job situation. It was really a neighborhood association that this comment came out. I knew enough, and it probably was kind of the times around me, that I did tell someone that it was an inappropriate. And his boss ended up talking to him about how it is that was not the kind of thing you would say, because it wasn't even just making the comment about my breasts, but it was also the idea that there are things that are funny And we know what's funny. It should make you feel good. The jokes that don't make you feel good, that give you pause, means that that was a dig, but it was done in a way to be able to say, oh, I didn't mean anything by that. Yes, you did. And I called you on it. And I was still a teenager. And I feel good about that because I was supported by some other elders in the community. Say, yeah, he took it too far and he needs to know that he can't do that.
Thank you for that. So it seems to me, listening to Bridget and Kat and then Dr. Johnson, it's a two-edged sword. It can be really useful, but it also can be weaponized, if that's the right word. Let me move on to our next question. And Nicole, if you would start us off on this one, because I heard you begin to address this earlier in the session. Dolly Parton, one of the original cast members of 9 to 5, is so hot right now. We've referred to her several times in this discussion. She's got new music, a new book. She's got a podcast. She's on Netflix. And she's loved by a lot of people. Her character in the 9 to 5 movie, Dora Lee, was a part that was written for Dolly. And she ends up developing a friendship and professional inspiration with her female coworkers. That's at the heart of the 9 to 5 storyline. So here's my question to the panelists. Have you drawn professional inspiration from other women? And tell us about that person. Who inspired you? From whom did you draw professional inspiration? And I heard you begin to address that, Nicole, and that's why if it's okay with you, we'd love to hear about how that question has influenced you.
Yeah, so it's exciting for me as I think of myself back to myself as a young dancer and needing representation, needing to see someone who looked like me. And when I went to college, I had this one amazing professor. She had this huge afro and she would like get on me. She would go back, nope, that's not right. She would always challenge me. And I have to give her a shout out. She's a professor of Duke. She runs Duke's dance program, Andrea Woods Valdez. And she now sits on my board for my nonprofit. But I just remember like reaching and just wanting to soak that energy of having someone who, as hard as she was on me, she got me and she understood what I needed as a dancer and that sense of like nurturing at the same time, getting me, pushing that level of expectation. I reflect the same values when I teach my students and anyone that's close to me in this circle, especially as movers and we're dancing and moving together. It's important that we build this sense and circle of trust, and it goes outside of just the actual all right, yeah, we're dancing, it's beyond that. It goes into having that, hey, I just need to talk about this, or do you need money for this? Like that sense of community that you can create by one, finding that common space, and then that representation. And I think as women, like unifying in that space of we have a common something that has brought us to this space, and then how can we expand and grow that circle? And that to me is how movements happen and how change really happens is, getting that inspirational person that you're like, yep, here we go. And then you can like go and ride in that space. So I wouldn't say it's a look up and Andre, like I look up to you. I'm like, oh my gosh, you don't know how much I look up to you in that same space, but having that reciprocity of coming back years later, to be an inspiration. I can share this inspiration and then to my students and share like, this is the woman that inspired me. And that's one of many. I could name so many more that have been in that space, but they are part of what I would say are my circle. In a sense.
Fabulous. Thank you. Let me ask Bridget, because Bridget is a graduate. I happen to know Bridget, and I know she's a graduate student now. And at least in my experience, there's oftentimes people that, as you suggested, Nicole, in your student days. Bridget, talk to us, if you can, about who has been an inspiration to you.
Absolutely. And just to start off, I have had the pleasure of having so many different pieces of inspiration from women who filled up such big spaces in all the different areas that I've worked in. I'm in the military, and as most people know, the military is a very male dominated field. And so this summer, I had the pleasure of having a Black female drill sergeant, and she was not only one of the only females that were there, she was one of the only Black females that were there. And everyone just loved her, not just because of her words and what she said, but because of her actions, making sure the soldiers were taken care of, making sure we actually learned something, and what she brought to the table and how she showed up to all of these spaces where she might have been the only person of color, she might have been the only female in the room, and just really being able to watch her and watch how she stood in her profession gave me that inspiration of, okay, I can model this and take this back to when I go back into my research settings, when I go back into my school settings, when I go back into my higher education settings, where I may be the only person in the research lab that looks like me. I may be the only female in the room. And so really just being able to pull from all these different spaces from these women who really had a very, very different story when you look at all the different people that I've had the pleasure of coming in contact with, but having a very similar common theme of their actions are going to speak louder than anything that they have to say, showing up for people and making sure they bring someone with them. That is so important, especially when just looking at female empowerment, bringing someone with you, making sure you pass down the information that you know, that you have learned, that you have gotten from your mentor, from their mentor's mentor, and really just passing it down the line, because it's just this steady flow of information and care that we see that really brings about the change that we want to make in the areas that we're in.
Thank you, Bridget. Kat, do you have a mentor? I shouldn't even use that word. We can talk about mentors, but from whom you've drawn inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky to work with an incredible team that includes women and also, genderqueer, trans folks, kind of all over the gender spectrum, which is a real gift. Our CEO, Nora Spencer, is certainly one of them. She kind of came up with this concept when she was in grad school for social work. And then I think about my grad school program for social work at NC State. I had some of the best faculty, just like the best faculty in the world that I know I can still reach out to if I ever need anything. That just a great community to be a part of. So yeah, very, very lucky.
And Dr. Johnson, how about from whom have you drawn inspiration in your life?
That's a real easy question for me, and it answers part of the question that's in 9 to 5. What happens when women don't see each other as rivals, but as colleagues and trust one another? And I had 3 important mentors in my professional development. I went to Spelman College, so I was surrounded in the space of womanness, and Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftall was my first real strong mentor, and she's been a lifetime mentor. She's been with me since I was 18 years old, and at each turn in my career, I can see that she's been there. And with her has been Dr. Janetta B. Cole, and she has helped support and promote me. And as she moves in her exalted spaces, she doesn't forget about the rest of us, the ones who listen to the advice, even when it's hard to take. And then my third is a mentor who's working with me now in this, and all of them have helped me in my professional development as I've moved through the academy, and that is Dr. Dorothy Brown. And all of these women have provided me not just with advice, but with friendship and the kind of tough love that says, okay, you know you can do this. Here's how. And by being examples in their own work of what excellence is in scholarship, how they're activists in the world. So what I've learned about being a scholar activist, I've learned from these women And that continuity, staying in your lives, like Nicole was saying, is so important. And it helps it to be a 360 mentorship, because I know I also have been able to mentor them.
Thank you so much. And I would like to end on that question by noting that Bridget was a part of a program that pairs up women, young scholars, undergraduates with, we call them femtors, not mentors. But we do that for the reasons that all of you have talked about, to teach lessons, to care. Some of the words that were, if they weren't exactly the same words, that resonated with all of you, speaking about those who inspired you, what were those long-term relationships, care, not just about professional life, but also, as Nicole began, asking about how you are. And so WomenNC tries to do that. And it sounds to me, when I listen to all of you, that all of us in this room have been lucky to have had those both inspirations and mentors or femtors that have helped move us along. And we've all acknowledged the need then to do that to the next generation as well. On that, I think I will end. It's been delightful and enlightening to speak with all of you, to converse with all of you. I want to thank all of the panelists for their time. I want to thank North Carolina Theater for allowing us to have this and facilitating this conversation. I'd like to thank the audience for taking the time to listen to these really interesting women who have a take on a really fabulous play that is going to be shown at the North Carolina Theater in May Mandy Hall. Let me make sure I have the date right. It's from October 12th through October 17th in Memorial Hall, in Memorial Auditorium in downtown Raleigh. But once again, thanks to the panelists, thanks for North Carolina Theater. We look forward to seeing you there. And we look forward and hope that this has opened up, as Bridget talked about, a space for you all to talk about issues surrounding women's empowerment as you go view 9 to 5 and as you work through and in your lives.
Thank you, Dr. Rieman, and all the panelists for this insightful community conversation. We look forward to seeing everyone at our production of 9 to 5. Join us next time for an engaging community conversation surrounding the themes of our upcoming production of Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill.